Hello everyone, my name is Michel Zibara and we're gonna run through that presentation today, which is understanding business analysis planning domain for the PMI PBA exam. Mainly three main topics, three core topics. We're gonna have an overview of the business analysis planning. What are the major tasks for business analysis planning, and what are the tools and techniques, the gear utilized to perform the business analysis planning. Starting with the overview of the business analysis planning, the business analysis planning normally occurs after the needs assessment domain. So we have gone through the needs assessment domain in our previous presentations. We have started our main tasks for the needs assessment domain in order to have an outcome, which is the business case in that case. So here in business analysis planning, it's a continuation. So we have to base our planning on the business case and on the core tasks which we have done earlier in the needs assessment domain, and continue in conjunction with the business analysis needs assessment domain. Once we have it can be that it runs in conjunction. The business analysis planning can run in parallel with the business analysis needs assessment domain, and it can be in, like everybody knows, a subsequent phase after the completion of the needs assessment domain. So with an initial high level needs assessment, we can start the planning of the business analysis. It's not a mandatory requirement to have completed in details the needs assessment domain. However, the best practice is that needs assessment domain need to be completed before we start the business analysis planning. A point to note that in the planning, the business analysis planning is done also in parallel with the project planning. So how do we know when to start the business analysis planning? It's a little bit, some people might confuse when to start the business analysis planning phase. So normally, I'm saying the ideal situation is to start once you hear that there is a business case, there is a sponsor assigned, and there is a project manager allocated to that project, right? This is when you will start the business analysis planning domain in parallel with the project manager that is performing the project management planning. So it happens in correlation, but this is when you will know when to start the business, or when projects or business analysts in project starts their business analysis planning phase or domain. So as we said before, we have discussed in the needs assessment, we have discussed a key point, which is mainly the role, responsibility, and accountability of the business analyst to do all the core tasks, which is the request, identify and analyze the problem, the opportunity, the constraint, identify key stakeholders. Please focus on in the needs assessment, identifying key stakeholders for the needs assessment domain, key, because we also have a core task in our presentation for business analysis planning, which is identify and analyze stakeholders. So all the stakeholders will be analyzed, and that exercise of stakeholder identification and analysis is an iterative and continuous process. It doesn't end in planning, but the expectations in business analysis planning is to have completed the identification and analysis of the whole stakeholders. That's the ideal situation again, right? So once, as we said, you hear that there is a sponsor assigned, there is a project manager appointed to the project, and that means we are in the planning phase, and specifically the business analysis planning phase, because as we said, they run in parallel. We have the project planning and we have the business analysis planning. So let's imagine or visualize we are in the planning phase, right? I want to highlight a key point here, because as we said, business analyst core responsibility and accountability is to do all the necessary work before, which will determine whether it's a go or no go decision for the project. Then if it is a go decision, upon needs assessment, there will be a business case to kickstart that project. The business analyst is also involved in the project. So before the business case, the business analyst, there is no project manager yet. So the business analyst is mainly is not part of the project. So he has more authority, let me put it this way, because there is no project manager. But once in the planning phase, the business analysis planning, there is a project manager. Therefore, the business analyst becomes a subset or part of the project team, which reports to the project manager. So the authority then lies within the project manager, starting from the planning phase and onward, right? So because some people confuse, I am the business analyst, I should not be reporting to the project manager. Project manager should be reporting to me, I should not be reporting to him. So no, let's make it clear. Before the project kickstart, there is no project manager. Therefore, the business analyst has, let's put it in brackets, more authority. But once the project kickstarts, the business analyst bluntly reports to the project manager. Okay. Overview of the business analysis planning. Okay. What are the responsibilities of a business analyst in business analysis planning domain? One might ask, what are the responsibilities? Well, we have some core and important responsibilities listed, but that's not all. Let's go through them. So, perform deeper analysis of the business case, which was the output from needs assessment. We have said that before. Assess the complexity of the project, type of the solution, and development approach. Okay, so how complex? So the business analyst will assess the complexity level of the project, the type of the solution, and the development approach, adaptive or predictive approach. The business analyst will deduce metrics, parameters from the measurable objectives to utilize for participating in defining the acceptance criteria to measure success. Okay, without acceptance criteria, again, that is a key concept which we're gonna discuss mainly, and this is in planning where we are talking about. So that definition of the acceptance criteria happens in planning, and that is mainly an indicator that measures success. So how can I determine whether my solution or my project is successful? I can only determine that if I meet the acceptance criteria, which is a measurable indicator set during the planning phase, discussed and agreed, and that is also signed off, because the acceptance criteria is part of the business analysis planning document, the business analysis plan. And we all know, before we move on, that business analysis plan will be signed off by the sponsor and also will be a subset of the project management plan. As we said, this work, the business analysis planning, is a subset of the holistic project management plan. Another responsibility of the BA during planning is to find out templates and standards and tools for use during the business analysis planning phase domain. Okay? These are the organization process assets. Okay? Finding out, uncovering, reading, researching about them. So that happens during the planning phase. And these are the organization process assets. Identify all stakeholders who will impact or be impacted by the solution and work with the PM to align on each stakeholder's role and responsibility on the project. Remember, identify all stakeholders and analyze these stakeholders. Okay? We are not saying identify all key stakeholder or identify key stakeholders. We are saying identify all the stakeholders. So in needs assessment, we identify key stakeholders. In planning, we identify and analyze all the stakeholders. Determine the elicitation technique that will be used with each stakeholder group. In the planning, I will plan ahead, predict, portend, document, plan, all these words for the future, how I am going or what techniques I am going to utilize to perform elicitation. And not only elicitation, as we discussed, perform elicitation, analysis, performing solution evaluation. We're gonna go through all of them. So define ahead of time during the planning for the future what change control process, what is the change control process that I will utilize in case after baselining there is a change request. So again, planning ahead of how this process is going to be. Again, evaluation process, planning about how I am going to evaluate, how I am going to perform the testing, the test plans. Document management, also I am planning how I am gonna store the documents, which document management system I am going to utilize ahead of time. All of this is during the planning. And again, the requirements management process. So I am planning ahead of all these things. So I'm thinking ahead about them. So proper planning, good project. Improper planning, that is going to result into a lot of challenges to the project. So always plan the work and work the plan. Okay, so let me add to it, plan the work properly and then work the plan. Okay, because if I plan the work improperly and I work the plan, I will have gaps. So plan the work properly and then work the plan. Determine how requirements will be documented and presented. Okay, that's, I think, again a more explanatory statement of document management system, but in addition to that, how I am going to present the requirements. Okay, estimate the time required to perform each BA task. As you know, the business analyst is also responsible for a schedule. It's not the project schedule, it's a schedule that mainly sequence the business analyst activities, and that becomes that should be submitted to the project manager for the project manager to incorporate that schedule, business analysis schedule, based on the estimation of the business analyst, into his project management plan, because again that will have impact on his project constraints and the schedule of his project, which is part of his schedule management plan. Develop a complete business analysis plan and provide it to the project manager to be incorporated in the project plan. So not only the schedule, but that's a comprehensive business analysis plan which will become a mandatory subset of the entire holistic project management plan. What are the major tasks of business analysis? The core tasks are: understand the project lifecycle approach, predictive or adaptive. We're going to talk about that in the next slide. Understand the solution context. We're going to talk about it in the next slide, and which is mainly at a very high level why I'm implementing that solution, how I'm going to implement it, where I'm going to implement it, when, and who is going to utilize it. Identify and analyze stakeholders. As you noticed, we don't have a key stakeholders, so we are identifying and analyzing all stakeholders in the planning phase, in the business analysis planning. And another core task is to define the acceptance criteria for the solution. That is the success criteria, pass or fail. That solution meets the requirements, meets the metrics. Does it meet the acceptance criteria which I set in the planning? So here is where we define that acceptance criteria. And we can have a quick example of acceptance criteria. For instance, I am a businessman and I have a company, right? I am making profit per annum, that is the as-is situation, let's say $100,000. I am investing in a project, in a solution, and that solution is going to bring me 20% more of my revenues or my profit, my annual profits. So if at the end of the year I make 120,000 profit, that acceptance criteria has been met. Therefore, that solution which I implemented is a successful solution, and it met the acceptance criteria which I set in the business analysis planning. And all of these, they are inputs to develop the business analysis plan. Okay, we're gonna discuss each in details in the subsequent slides. As we said, what are the major tasks? First task is predictive. Like we said, the life cycle approach. We need to understand the life cycle approach. Two life cycle approaches for projects are predictive or adaptive. Predictive has synonyms or similar acronyms, which are abbreviation or words that are used. Mainly you can say predictive, plan driven, waterfall, traditional, legacy, right? So, and what are a brief description of each of them and their application. So in predictive life cycle approach, the solution is clearly and completely designed before built. That's very clear. That happens at the beginning of the project. Okay, it's very formal. Requirements are elicited and analyzed early in the project and used to build a detailed, realistic project management plan. So everything is formal. Everything is rigid in terms of changes. Any change follows the change management process by the book. So it's very formal. Business analysis work is more formal and very heavily concentrated in the early stages of the project management process, initiating and planning process groups. Very clear. Elicitation analysis technique are more formal than in adaptive. Where do I apply? Mainly the predictive life cycle approach in construction projects. Why? Because predictive life cycles are used on projects to fulfill regulatory requests and in industries where the products and processes are more foreseeable and repeatable. So let's say I have constructed a building. How many times? I know the context of that solution. There is no uncertainty. Therefore, the processes and the steps are more or less the same. So therefore, I would be using the predictive lifecycle approach on such projects. The other lifecycle approach is adaptive, change-driven, agile, Scrum, extreme programming, iterative, incremental, lightweight. All of these are adaptive. So you can hear change-driven life cycle. Then you will deduce it is adaptive. You can hear agile, and you know you are adopting an adaptive life cycle approach. Any of these words are the same. What happens in the adaptive, change-driven, agile, or Scrum approach? Solution gets deployed rapidly in increments. So I give the customer a product, the minimum viable product, a working solution I give to the customer, right, to fulfill the requirements. I don't keep the customer or the client, whether internal or external, waiting for a long time. No, I deliver in phases. I show progress. I deliver in sprints, iterations, releases, and increments. So he can start to use the solution before it is completed. Requirements are progressively elaborated as they are needed, of course, because that is by sprints, by iterations. So it's welcoming change, agile, adaptive. There will be a lot of changes, less formality compared to the predictive lifecycle approach. And the changes in requirements are always welcomed and embraced. Okay, so that is the mindset of agile or adaptive compared to predictive. Where do we apply such project lifecycle approaches? They are mainly applied in projects that has a high level of uncertainty. As an example, e-commerce, banking, or software development solutions or projects. Understand the solution context. That is the third task. No, sorry, that's the second major task in business analysis planning. And this mainly is for understanding this solution context is mainly understanding who will use the solution and how will it be used as a core part in its environment. So when we say solution context, just to give a quick example which will make it more easier to understand what is the solution context. Let's say I'm sitting on my desk. I have a chair where I sit comfortably and it fits in its location. That's a quick example. So I have bought a chair, and that chair fits in the environment where I am using it. So the furniture, the dimensions of the desk, the chair fits in, no issues, no problem. I can buy the same chair, bigger chair, where I will use it in that context, in my environment where I sit, and I will not be able to sit properly in. That means that chair did not fit in its proper context. The solution is the chair, and the solution context is the environment around the chair, the desk, so this is now fitting properly. But if it is a bigger chair, there is nothing wrong with the solution. Sometimes you deliver a solution, nothing wrong. The chair is perfect, is excellent, no problem. But because of improper understanding of the solution context, which is in other terms, the solution environment, the surroundings, that project will result in rework, extra cost incurred, and changes. So it's very important in the planning for the business analyst to understand the solution context. And this is the solution context. Where, when, how, who will use it. These are the main questions that should be answered in that major core task in business analysis planning. The solution scope and the context should be captured in a solution scope statement. Okay? It should be in the solution scope statement and must be approved by the sponsor or the product owner. That's very clear. After the above approval of the solution scope and context by the sponsor or the product owner, it must be baselined. Okay? Baseline, because we have frozen the solution scope, have done proper needs assessment, a proper planning, and came out with a solution scope which was documented and baselined. Baselined means frozen. Any change after baselining should be followed under the change control process or management of change. It depends that from one organization to the other. Some use management of change control process. In the analysis phase, to be requirements that make up the solution will be baseline. So so baselining the solution scope happens in planning, whereas baselining the to-be requirements happens in the analysis phase, the subsequent phase to business analysis planning. Identify and analyze stakeholders. Make a list of all stakeholders, and so now, before we go into that, this is another task, core task, the third in business analysis planning. So, identify and analyze all the stakeholders. Again, what are the responsibilities of the business analyst? Making a list of stakeholders and stakeholders group who will impact or be impacted by the solution. And we should be capturing the titles of the stakeholders, their work location or the stakeholder group, their role on the project, their preferred method of communication and presentation, how I'm going to present these requirements to them, and preferred time of the day or day of the week for meeting. So all of these, in addition to more of them, like what are the elicitation techniques that I'm gonna use, what do they prefer? They prefer interviewing, they prefer workshop, requirements workshop, do they prefer for instance focus groups? So this is where I will have a deep analysis of the characteristics of the stakeholders, their attitude, their influence, their impact on the project. So let's go further. Understanding stakeholder roles and responsibilities. Perform stakeholder analysis by looking at their characteristics, background, belief, and behavior to determine how best to work with them. Determine stakeholders' influence, attitude, culture, authority, and impact in the organization. This task is a common area which requires collaboration between the BA and the PM to avoid duplication of efforts and coherence. So, as we said, planning, there are a lot of common areas between the BA, the business analyst, and the PM, project manager. Okay, so these two key people during the planning phase should be working closely together to avoid any duplication of efforts. They don't want to be, for instance, the BA would be completing a stakeholder management plan, and the PM is completing a stakeholder management plan, and both of them are working off tangent. Both of them at the end should be working together in order not to have two similar deliverables, especially during that planning phase. Being politically aware is very important in requirements, elicitation, and management work. Okay, we all know what there are a lot of office politics or political environments, and I'm not saying that politics is bad. Politics is very good because, in loose terms, politics is the science or the art of influencing people, right? So I'm not saying politics is bad, but politics is visible up to a certain level in each and every environment, and politics is in each and every organization. You might not be able to see it, but it is there. It might not be as obvious as other organizations, but it is still there. Politics is in our everyday's life. So different stakeholders will have different needs, priorities, ideas about how a solution to be built. The BA must listen to everyone's idea and facilitate the group to come to a mutually satisfactory decision, or in other terms, like what we discussed before, helping them reach consensus. Define the stakeholders' preferred communication protocols. So, this major task, I have a sub-task in planning also for the BA to define the stakeholders' preferred communication protocols, their preferred requirements format. How do they want the requirements to be presented to them? Sorry. Before we go to the last core task in business analysis planning, this is an important major and core task also, which is define the acceptance criteria for the solution. We have spoken about it, acceptance criteria or success criteria or success metrics, all of them are measurable or key performance indicators. All of them are measurable indicators for success. Okay, so acceptance criteria are the conditions that must be met by the solution before the sponsor and key stakeholders will approve or accept the solution. Acceptance criteria should be measurable. Steps for defining the acceptance criteria. As we said, I cannot determine what is the future or the to be state and measure it unless I know the current situation or the as is state of my organization. As I've given an example before, if I have a corporation and I am making $100,000 a per annum, I should know that I am making $100,000 per annum. This is the as is state. The future state is 20% increase in the profit, and this is where I am building a solution to meet the future to be state in terms of metrics 20%. So I need to know what criteria I want. First of all, I want to increase revenue. Okay, capture the current state metrics. I am making 100,000 profit per annum, and decide on the desired future states metrics. I want 20% increase in the profit. That's another $20,000. So we can visualize the acceptance criteria. Planning for test plans, solution evaluation, development, and post-implementation assessment. So planning doesn't stop here, but it still goes to the level of telling in the future what test plans I am going to use, what solution evaluation processes I'm going to use during the deployment and after the deployment to check the benefit realization. Okay? And the return on investment or the business value. Develop business analysis plan. That is the last, no, sorry, that's before, that's the last core task in business analysis planning. If we go back to our first slide, so we have gone through that, we have done the context, we identified the stakeholders, we defined the acceptance criteria, and now we have reached to develop the business analysis plan. Okay? So, what are the content of business analysis plan. Scope management plan. Scope management plan, that is part of the project management plan, and it contains format of the scope statement or diagrams to be used. Could be context diagram, use case diagram. Description of the scope baselining procedure, because as we said in planning, I'm gonna baseline the solution scope, and then after that I will have a change control process for any changes in scope. We need to be mindful of scope creep. That's why we need to have a change control process in place. Scope creep is adding additional changes or features or scope to the solution scope without assessing the constraints, that is cost, time, and quality. Probably all these constraints need to be assessed before we start adding anyhow. So therefore we need to use or utilize a change control process. List of interfaces and their expected changes. Okay, in solution, in context diagram, we have list of interfaces and their expected changes. Change management process for requested scope changes. Communication management plan. Okay, communication management plan contains a list of stakeholders and their contact information. Okay, stakeholder communication, not only their contact information, but so much details upon analysis of the stakeholders. Stakeholder communication preferences, planning frequency of communications, elicitation plans and schedule dates, requirements review and walkthrough schedule. In addition, a business analysis plan contains stakeholder management plan, which is an explanation of how stakeholders will be identified, description of how and when stakeholders will be involved, stakeholder communication preferences, description of how stakeholders' engagement and expectations will be managed. We continue with the content of develop business analysis plan. The content of business analysis plan, requirement management plan, and it contains, the requirement management plan contains location of requirements, document repository, where I am going to store the requirements, how requirements will be documented and presented, and their formats, gather requirements according to their types. You remember the requirements types. We have the business, stakeholder, solution, functional, non-functional, and quality, and the transition requirements, which are part of the turnover or the trainings and all the procedures upon turning the solution from the construction phase or the project phase into operations. Checklist of requirements, standards to be followed, description of how requirements will be prioritized, traceability strategy, that's traceability matrix, linking to objectives, linking to other dependency analysis, requirements dependency analysis, and linking to solution releases. Requirements attributes to be collected. The most important two are state and priority. You remember we have the requirements attribute, and the most important is state, whether completed, deferred, accepted, rejected, what's the condition of that, or what's the attribute of that requirement, and its priority. Description of how requirements progress will be reported, requirement states, description of how requirements change management process. Okay, so the requirement states, as we said here, rejected, accepted, deferred. Description of the requirements change management process, list of points where the requirements will be baselined, modeling and diagramming techniques to be used, sign off and approval points for requirements. Quality management plan is a sub-plan of the business analysis plan, and it includes checklist of requirements, standards to be followed, requirements review and walkthrough schedule, sign-off or approval point for requirements. Another sub-plan of the business analysis plan is change management plan. In that plan, we have descriptions of the requirements change management process, list of points where the requirements will be baseline, and requirements change request form. Document management plan is another sub-plan. Location of requirements, it contains the location of the requirements, document repository, version control system, list of document required by the project management process. With that, now we will come to discuss the tools and techniques which are utilized in business analysis planning. Lessons learned and retrospective. Retrospective, for the Agile guys, they know what retrospective means. Are walkthrough or reviews to enhance the iteration by the end of every iteration or sprint, right? So it's like a knowledge base, more or less like a lessons learned also. So, but this is in Agile. So this is lessons learned in Agile, documented at the end of each iteration or sprint. Okay. So this is a tool and technique that helps in the major core task of business analysis planning, and that is, as we said in the slide before, which is the life cycle approach, predictive or adaptive. Context diagram. This is a tool and technique which we have discussed, where we have the solution scope in the middle, we have the interfaces with the externals in terms of arrows and functionalities, and that helps with the solution. That's a tool and technique which helps in understanding the solution context, which is part of the core business analysis tasks which we discussed before. Use case diagram also goes hand in hand. We have discussed them in needs assessment. Use case diagram is also a visual graphic diagram where we have the functions or the use cases in circles within a rectangle, and then we have the actors as users represented as personnel outside, and then you have matching arrows between the business cases and the actors. Between the use cases and the actors, sorry. Organizational modeling. Organization modeling helps in stakeholder identification and analysis. How? Take a simple example, organigram, or any organizational modeling based on functions, on positions and functions. So all of these documents, all these techniques will be used to come out with identifying and analyzing all the stakeholders in the planning phase. RACI matrix, also the same. It helps with the identification and analysis of stakeholders in the planning phase. RACI stands for responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed. Okay, and a grid or matrix which has all these intersections. Group decision making. Group decision making is a tool and technique that is utilized in mainly developing the business analysis plan. Okay. What are the group decision making techniques? Some of them, not all, you have autocratic, like a dictator present and making a decision, and everybody in that room should follow that decision. You have unanimous decision, and that is 100%. Everybody agrees unanimously in that meeting. You have consensus also. Unanimous is by voting. Then consensus is by agreement. There's a difference between unanimous group decision technique and consensus. And um, we have mainly a plurality is one of the group decision making techniques. Compromise is another one. So these are the group decision techniques which will be used also in planning to provide an outcome. Backlog management. That is a prioritization technique which is used, which mainly represents the user stories in a table along with their priorities ranked by cost or by risk, and it will show which high level or high priority user stories will go into which releases or iterations, will be implemented in which releases or iteration, if we are using Scrum or Agile methodologies. And that is only in Agile lifecycle approach. Weighted criteria or ranking, also that's a table where it's like a scorecard where you have a score of each criteria and a rank for each criteria, and then the summation of these rankings or scores based on the higher value, it will be the highest priority, and that will be built first. Moscow analysis is another prioritization technique, which is M stands for must do priority, so this is the highest priority. S stands for should do, C stands for could do, and W stands for won't do. Okay, so you have the requirements, or you have the prioritized solutions, and then you determine which is the highest priority based on must do, should do, could do, or won't do. Okay. Problem tracking, conflict resolution. Okay, that's simple. That's a problem tracking, conflict resolution tools and technique. As we discussed before, conflict resolution, the business analyst should be the conduit. The business analyst is the conduit between all stakeholders. Okay, like you have water flowing through a conduit. Okay, so business analyst should be the conduit of that seamless water resolving conflict between stakeholders. Okay, how to do that? Should be using facilitation techniques, should be referring back to the business case and the project objectives and the organization strategy, and on that basis try to bring all the stakeholders to consensus. Why consensus? Because that's the best. Autocratic doesn't work. Compromise doesn't work. It works, but it's not. So the ultimate goal is to reach consensus, because that is when you have high chances for success in your project. So as we said, another conflict resolution task could be to try to ask the question, is there any dependency between this solution or that? Because if you link that dependency, then you will know that I cannot do that solution before I get this solution done. Therefore, the stakeholders that are aiming for this solution will agree that, okay, right, that conflict is resolved because that secondary solution or that secondary requirement is dependent on the completion of the first requirement or the first solution. That's another key how to resolve conflict. Okay, so we refer back to the business case. We try to check if there is dependencies between the requirements the conflicting requirements or the solutions, and then we try to uh, rate, or based on the ranking also, we try to assess the cost and the risk of each solution and make it visible for the stakeholders. That will also resolve conflict between stakeholders. So these are the key uh, the key tasks of the business analysis to follow whenever he is in such a situation. Averaging estimation, okay, again, as we said, one of the tools and techniques which the business analyst should use, because again the business analyst has a schedule, he has business analysis activities sequenced, and he has a schedule for that which he will present for the project manager to incorporate in his comprehensive project management plan. So averaging technique, or what you guys are familiar with from PMP, is simple average. That is pessimistic plus optimistic plus most likely estimations divided by 3. That's the formula. Okay. uh, Averaging estimations, simple average estimation, we have also a triangular distribution or beta distribution, what you know, where we have a weight on the most likely estimations. For example, the formula is pessimistic plus optimistic plus 4 times most likely estimation divided by summation of them divided by 6. So in average estimation we have simple average, and we have beta or triangular distribution or weighted average estimation. Quadrant analysis is another analysis technique also used for estimation, and a planning poker estimation. You guys might be very familiar with planning poker, especially the agile people, or in general everybody. A lot of people use planning poker, but mainly because it involves user stories. So you have a lot of people in one room, okay, subject matter experts, cards would be distributed to them. One of the people being present in that meeting will read a story and will count to 3, where everybody will open their cards and estimate that user story, right? And the cards are based on a Fibonacci series. I don't know if you guys remember the Fibonacci a little bit. Fibonacci is like a sequence based on, for example, let me tell you. So we have a set of numbers that starts from 0 till 10, let's say. Okay, so you take the first two numbers, 0 plus 1, the result is 1. Okay, then you add 1 plus 1, 0 plus 1 is 1, and then 1 plus 2 is 3, and then 3 plus 2 is 5. So the Fibonacci series starts from 1, 3, 5, 5 plus 3, 8. So this is the Fibonacci series. So all these cards are rated based on Fibonacci series. So you will not see a card having, for instance, 2. You will see a card having 1, or a card having 3, or a card having 5. So then these cards will be thrown on the table, and the guy that estimation will, if that estimation is linear, or not linear is the proper word. It's mainly, there is no huge variance between the estimations, then the guy that is reading will continue reading the second story, and so on, so forth. So if there is one estimation out of the norm, then that would be discussed among the team, and again it will be re-estimated to make sure all the results or all the cards converge to a closer estimate. So that is also planning poker estimation is one of the tools and techniques used in planning a business analysis phase or domain. Right, guys, we have covered mainly all the core concepts, or the majority, I would say 95% of the core concepts of the business analysis planning for your preparation, for your PMI PBA exam preparation. If you have questions, or if there are some things that are unclear, please go ahead and write them down in the comment box, and I will do my best to answer each of your questions. If you liked that presentation and you are happy with the content and you want to encourage me to upload more videos, please again do not forget to subscribe and do not forget to select the bell icon so you can receive a notification of all these upcoming videos. Thank you so much, and I hope this presentation was informative for all of you.